The Jets get their first round pick signed early, and it's a very good sign that this Jets front office may avoid some of the mistakes of previous Jets front offices. That and thoughts about rookie minicamp today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, May 12th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. We have a busy show today. This weekend, the Jets conducted their rookie minicamp. I'm going to be a buzzkill. I'm going to tell you why this past weekend really wasn't that important. We got some insight into how Aaron Glenn's going to run the team. We will talk about that. But let's begin with some big news that broke right before the start of rookie minicamp. And it's good news for the Jets. Armand Membou, the 7th overall pick, has signed his rookie contract. It is a 4-year contract. It is worth $31.913 million. It is fully guaranteed. It also comes with a 5th-year option that the Jets will decide whether to pick up after his 3rd season. Now, these figures are all set by the rookie wage scale. So we knew the amount of money Armand Membou was going to make. But it's still a good sign that the Jets were able to get him locked in and signed before the start of rookie minicamp. And that means there will be no holdout for the Jets' first-round pick this year. The reason that this is significant, above all else, is since the advent of the rookie wage scale in 2011, almost every single team in the league had an easy time getting its first round into training camp on time. There have been the occasional holdouts, Joey Bosa with the Chargers. There was Roquan Smith's holdout with the Chicago Bears. But for the most part, 31 of the 32 teams have had an easy time getting their first round picks in camp on time. The one exception to that has been the New York Jets. And this began in 2013 with Dee Milner. And it continued with Sam Darnold and Quinnen Williams and Zach Wilson, all players who the Jets drafted early in the first round who held out. Now, none of these players held out for very long. They were all on the opening day roster. In fact, all of them were starters on week 1. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But I've always referred to getting your first round pick on time in today's NFL as kind of a competence test. And they just have failed that competence test over and over and over. And, I have a theory that if you put powerful people with big egos in a room and give them any sort of thing they can disagree on, they will figure out a way to disagree on it. And that's kind of what's happened with the Jets through the years. Now, I will say this. I think that the issues of getting these first-round picks on time has been more of an ownership issue than a GM issue. Why do I say that? Well, because this started with John Idzik. It continued with Mike Maccagnan, and it continued all the way through Joe Douglas. It's 3 GMs. Now, is it possible that these GMs have completely botched everything? Sure. But I get the feeling when the same issue keeps popping up over and over and over with multiple GMs on the same team, it's probably ownership. And there are still some things that can be negotiated in these first year contracts. Even though the dollar figures are set, you have to negotiate when there are bonus payments that need to be paid, but the timing of these payments is up for negotiation. So when Quinnen Williams held out, the thing that was the holdup was the timing of the bonus payments. Quinnen Williams wanted them up front because he was still an Alabama resident that year. And if the bonus payments got pushed to the next year, he'd be a resident of New York and New Jersey, and there were tax implications for that. Another issue that's popped up over and over is the idea of offsets. And essentially what an offset is it only comes into play if a player's cut. But if I'm cut and my contract has offsets and I sign $1 million contract with another team, the Jets payment, because it's a guaranteed salary, is reduced by $1 million. If there is no offset, I get cut. The Jets have to pay me my full contract, and then I also get on top of that whatever contract I sign with a new team. These are minor issues. The offsets would only save you maybe $1 million. It never made sense to me why the Jets were so dug in on the offsets. I mean, the Jets who've rolled over on negotiations on critical factors year after year after year, for whatever reason, really stood their ground on something that was irrelevant with offsets. And I think that speaks to ownership. But even though I think ownership is more to blame than the GMs, one of the things I never understood about these contract negotiations the Jets conducted is why they began so late. Because you'd hear about it a week before training camp started. Now there's an issue because they had not talked about a contract up until that point. And if you know that like there could be a problem, if you know like ownership's dictating certain terms of the contract, why not get it done early? Why not try and hammer things out months before the player needs to negotiate? We're really early in the Aaron Glenn, Darren Muji administration. We don't know much about them. We don't know how good they are going to be, and I don't want to read too much into what's going on because it's very tempting before these guys have coached a game or before Darren Muji's team has taken the field. It's very tempting to say that they're really good or really bad. All we get right now are like little bits and pieces of information here and there. And these little bits of information can give us a kind of a small insight as to whether these guys are doing the job the way they should be doing it. And getting Armand Membou signed this early, before the start of rookie minicamp, to me, that's a really positive step. That to me, that shows that these guys are focused, thinking things through. That doesn't mean the Jets are going to win 15 games this year. It doesn't mean that Glenn and Muji are necessarily guaranteed to be a successful duo. But it does mean that they took a task that's in front of them and handled it well and handled it professionally and got Armand Membou signed and did not let, essentially if there were going to be any potential pitfalls, they were able to see this in advance. They were able to work through them early and avoid a distraction, avoid a rookie missing practice time needlessly. It's not the end of the world when your rookie holds out. I mean, you've heard some of the people who have held out. Joey Bosa, who became one of the best pass rushers in the league. Roquan Smith, who became one of the best linebackers in the league. Guys who are drafted in the first round are drafted high because they have talent, but you still want them in practice from day one. You don't want them missing practice, and you don't want a distraction. Again, this is like a competency test, and I would say that the Jets front office passed their first competency test by getting Armand Membou signed. And now the Jets can look forward to an offensive line that on paper looks pretty good because you have 4 of your 5 offensive linemen who are either first or second round picks, and all 4 of them are in year 5 or younger. So this is an offensive line. I don't know what's going to happen with John Simpson long term, but this is an offensive line where most of the key pieces could be here for a very long time. This could be the type of line that grows together. And as we know, continuity on the offensive line is important because there has to be very quick communication, and chemistry matters. And working with the guy next to you for a long time, that makes the line better. Offensive lines, I say this all the time, it's not an individual position. The way, if you're a wide receiver, you're running a route. The way somebody else runs a route isn't really going to impact you all that much, how you do your job. On the offensive line, the guys next to you are really important, and the ability to develop chemistry is critical. And now the Jets don't have to worry about whether their starting right tackle is going to be in training camp on time. They can start to build that chemistry on day one. Armand Membou can work next to Elijah Vera Tucker, and this just also sets up an exciting potential for the Jets to have bookend tackles for the foreseeable future. Olu Fashanu and Armand Membou, and they're both playing on pretty cheap contracts because they're on their rookie deals. So Jets could get high caliber tackle play for a very cheap price. Usually it costs you a lot of money to have really good tackle play. Jets essentially are getting really good tackle play, and they can spend the money they're saving to build up the rest of the roster. So very exciting stuff for the New York Jets. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about something else that's exciting. They have a new head coach, Aaron Glenn. And Aaron Glenn spoke to the media at rookie minicamp this weekend. He talked about one of his mentors, and Aaron Glenn has 3 really intriguing mentors. He talked about one in particular, and these are the mentors who could shape who Aaron Glenn is as a head coach. And if these guys do shape him, it could be a good thing for the Jets. We'll talk about that and more ahead here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize just how much you're spending on food delivery, Now you can budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Again, it's code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets conducted their mini camp this past weekend at the team facility in Florham Park, New Jersey. I don't think the results on the field are actually all that important to mini camp. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but Aaron Glenn addressed the media. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're very, very early in the Aaron Glenn Darren Muji regime. We haven't played a game yet, so we can't really say how good they're going to be. One of the things I always try and look at in press conferences is to get a sense of, sometimes like a coach or a GM will give you a little nugget of information about how they approach their job. And I think Aaron Glenn did that this weekend. He talked about coaches who have had an influence on him. And he mentioned one coach in particular. It's no surprise. I mean, it's the head coach of the team. He came from the Detroit Lions, Dan Campbell. And he talked about how he felt like Campbell was training him to be a head coach when he worked in Detroit as the defensive coordinator, and how he developed relationships with offensive players like Jamison Williams, Detroit, one of Detroit's wide receivers. And thinking this through, Glenn really has had like three big mentors. One is Bill Parcells, legendary coach who coached Glenn when he was a player with the Jets. Another was Sean Payton. Glenn came up in the Saints organization as a position coach. Payton was the head coach in New Orleans. And then Campbell, who came to Detroit. Campbell was actually an assistant in New Orleans. Glenn followed him from the Saints to the Lions. All three of these coaches have something in common. They're viewed as very, very strong leaders. They all have like they'll have differences, but all three of them are viewed as guys who are real leaders in the locker room. You can see like Glenn maybe borrowing influence from all of them. Parcells, like I want to be careful about how I compare Aaron Glenn to Bill Parcells, because I'm not saying Aaron Glenn is Bill Parcells, and I'm not even saying he is as good in media relations in year one as Bill Parcells was at the point he was with the Jets, where he had won 2 Super Bowls and been to a 3rd Super Bowl. But I see stylistically similarities between Aaron Glenn and Bill Parcells and how they deal with the media. You can see that already. Again, not saying that Aaron Glenn is Bill Parcells, but I'm saying that I think that in terms of style, when dealing with the media, and dealing with the media is important in New York, I do see some overlap. All the time I've watched the Jets, which is over 3 decades, there have really only been 3 coaches who have been good at dealing with the media. There was Rex Ryan, Herm Edwards, and Bill Parcells. And the style of Rex Ryan and Herm Edwards was kind of similar. They viewed media relations as theater. They kind of understood that aspect of it, where they were trying to give the media a story. They're kind of trying to control the story by being the story. And they were very theatrical. The two of them were very entertaining as Jets head coach. Parcells was a little different. Parcells was dismissive of the media, but in a charming way. It was very disarming. If somebody asked a stupid question, he'd kind of say it was a stupid question, but he'd do it in a way that was not insulting. And you see that with Aaron Glenn a lot. You saw it after the draft when he was asked about Aaron Rodgers' comments. He was asked if he had any response to that, and Glenn said, "Yes, I do have a response to that. We love our." He said something to the lines that we're very happy with Armand Membou as our 7th overall pick. You see stuff like that where it's Adam Gase was dismissive of the media, but he came off as very defensive. You see, and again, in this city, managing the media is very important. So you see that Parcells influence in him. But Glenn talked about the Dan Campbell influence. He talked about how, Campbell forced him to think about the whole team, that it wasn't just about the defense. And in today's NFL, there's this theory that you can only be a successful head coach if you're a glorified offensive coordinator. If you're only a guy who comes in and runs the offense, you don't worry about the defensive side of the ball. That's the only type of good head coach there is. And I don't think that that's accurate. Now, if you get a guy like a Sean McVay or a Matt LaFleur or a Kyle Shanahan, a guy who's a legitimately great offensive mind, that works. But that's not the only model for a successful head coach in this league. And I think that the danger of thinking that's the only successful model is it leads you to do things like hire Adam Gase as your head coach, as the Jets did in 2019. Very much under that theory, the Jets seem to be in the mindset that they could only hire an offensive coach. That they needed someone as a glorified offensive coordinator, and that leads to, if you limit your search to something like that, you're asking for trouble. I mean, when the Jets hired Adam Gase, the praise was, well, he may not have been a great coach. He may not be a great coach, but at least he's an offensive guy. Another thing that was said over and over was he was the first Jets head coach with an offensive background since Rich Kotite. Well, if you're the first anything since Rich Kotite, that shows you that thing's not very important. Aaron Glenn comes in, and he's kind of said he wants to be more of a CEO style coach. And I really believe that's what the Jets need right now. Now, will Glenn be successful? That's a question that we'll find out. But this Jets team has had a bad culture for years, and culture is a very nebulous term. I acknowledge that. And it's a term that I think is frequently misused. But watching this Jets team, not just in the Robert Saleh era, but even before that, I mean, you can go back over a decade. I've become very uncomfortable with how accepting this team is of losing. It's almost like losing's okay in this organization. The Jets have been and this has been true for regime after regime, the Jets have made excuses for losing year after year after year. Well, we lost Aaron Rodgers. How can we compete? Even in the year where teams are playing backup quarterbacks and going to the playoffs. This goes all the way back. This goes back over a decade. I think that we reached a point in the Brady Belichick era where the mindset of the Jets organization was almost like, well, you can't expect us to compete against one of the sport's greatest dynasties. And that's not to say it was easy. Of course, it was very difficult competition. But you have to have the mindset that you're going to go out there and try and beat them. You have to have the mindset that we can beat them. And that was something the Jets lost. And I don't think they've ever really recovered I don't think they've ever really gotten on the right foot. I think the Jets need someone to come in and just say, we're not making any excuses anymore. We're expecting people to win. We're expecting people to play well. We're expecting people to work hard. If you don't do that, we'll find people who will. Again, a lot of this goes to the owner, who also needed, talking about a culture change needed. Jets could use a new owner, but short of that, the Jets need someone who can go in and manage the owner. I think that Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas were so desperate to keep their jobs that they didn't even. It doesn't really feel like they ever pushed back on Woody Johnson. Now, I don't know how movable Woody Johnson was on some of his crazy moves over the last couple of years, but it just kind of felt like Saleh and Douglas were resigned to Woody being Woody. And that's not going to work for the Jets. Jets need somebody like Aaron, hopefully like Aaron Glenn, who can go in and change this culture, who can push back on Woody Johnson when he has bad ideas, because that's the only way the Jets are going to turn this thing around. And I don't know that bringing in a glorified offensive coordinator was going to work for this team, because if Woody has a brainstorm, that's going to, what Woody wants is going to go into effect. I think the Jets need a strong voice. I think the Jets need a strong leader. I think the Jets need someone in the Campbell or Peyton, Parcells. I don't want to say Parcells because Parcells is an all-time coach, but someone in that mold, someone who's a strong leader, someone who's going to take control of the football operation. Again, I'm not saying Aaron Glenn's necessarily going to be great, but I think that this is the type of coach, someone of the Dan Campbell mold is what the only way the Jets are going to turn this around is having a guy like that. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about some of the results of rookie minicamp this weekend. And I'm going to burst a lot of bubbles. I'm sure people are going to be upset with me, but I'm just going to tell you, those standout performances you're hearing about the early picks, they don't mean a whole lot. I'm sorry to say it. I'll tell you why, and I think you may not like it, but it'll be logical. I'll explain it as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. We have just completed Jets rookie minicamp over the last weekend. A lot of stories being filed about, who the top performers were, and they tend to be the guys the Jets drafted. And, I don't want to burst everybody's bubble about this, but I don't think the actual player performances in rookie minicamp are really all that meaningful. And let me explain why I say that. You have to think about who's in rookie minicamp. So it's the players the Jets drafted, obviously. Then the undrafted free agents they signed. Jets also brought in 12 players to try out. And then, typically you're allowed to bring in guys who were rookies last year but didn't play a whole lot. So if you think about that group, the majority of players are probably not going to be on NFL 53-man rosters this year. The players who will be are the players who were drafted, particularly the first-round picks. And so this is not like a Jets thing. This is just like all across the NFL this past weekend because rookie mini camps took place all over the league. You'll probably, if you read articles about the stand-up performers in any team's rookie mini camp, it's going to be the first-round pick and the second-round pick. And there's a reason for that. These are first-round picks and second-round picks going against guys who largely were not drafted. So, of course, they're going to dominate. It would be a crazy thing if they didn't dominate. These are guys who are better prospects than the guys they're going up against. And that's not to say, look, I am very high on Armand Membou. I think he's going to be a very good player in this league. But I don't, this is just like the first practice of his career. So it's not like it. Would you ever like judge a player based on how he performs in practice? No. And you especially wouldn't do it based on the first practice of his entire career. And this weekend, this weekend is like the prototypical, the expression is, I think, drinking from a fire hose weekend. Coaches are just throwing as much as they can at these players. They want to see how much of the playbook they can digest. It's kind of like an early stress test to see like what they can handle, put them in situations where they're not familiar and try and like have them work their way through it. But on the field, you would expect the top prospects to shine. If the top prospects didn't shine, it would be a major surprise. Now, I know like what people will say is, well, at least they did what they were supposed to do. And look, that's true. But, if these guys weren't shining against late round picks, I don't know what we'd be doing here. So I don't think any of these results really matter all that much. Even guys who are like day 3 picks, they tend to be a higher level than their opponents. I don't really understand the concept of rookie minicamp, to be honest with you. It's just a couple of days. I don't know how much value is really gleaned from it. I think to the extent there's value, it comes in the form of the tryout players, because you have your rookies who were drafted, you have your rookies who were signed as undrafted free agents, but then teams also bring in players who were neither, players who were not good enough to be drafted or ranked high enough to be undrafted free agent signings. They give them tryouts, and those players are essentially trying to play their way into becoming a non-drafted free UDFA signing. These guys are still undrafted free agents. They're still available to sign with any team, and they're trying to earn their spot onto a roster. I don't really know like what you can learn from a guy in 2 days that would lead him to earn a roster spot. In fact, I think the NFL really needs to rethink the way they do this rookie orientation stuff. You look across other leagues like the NBA. After the draft in the NBA, they actually have like a developmental league. It's called the NBA Summer League, which takes place where drafted players play, but teams also have tryout players. And that, I think, gives you a better sense of who can play, because it's a league that takes place over a couple of weeks. So you get to see players in actual game action for a long stretch. In the current NFL, you essentially get like 2 days of practice, which I don't really, again, like if you're trying to like actually figure out who's going to be able to play for you, 2 days of practice isn't really going to do all that much. The other aspect of the NBA Summer League is it gives guys who really didn't get much playing time in the regular NBA season a chance to get game experience, get reps, and develop. I think that's important. I think that's something that's really lacking in the NFL. The NFL, I think, could either use like a formal minor league system, like baseball has the minor leagues or hockey has the minor leagues or the NBA has the G League, or at least some sort of developmental off-season league, or maybe both. Occasionally like a new minor league pops up, like the UFL. Years ago we had the Alliance of American Football, the XFL, which is now part of the UFL. And sometimes these leagues like form partnerships with the NFL, but I think it would be better for the league to just do it itself. And then you get NFL coaching. Like the Jets could have like their own team. They could have a team with Jets coaches running the Jets system, and these players could get immersed in like running the plays that they need to run and give them actual game reps. And I think you just create a league where players are more developed, because at the end of the day, there's nothing more valuable than game reps. It's just really difficult to use game reps purely as a developmental tool, because in the regular NFL season, there's a lot of pressure to win games. If you're a coach and you don't win games in the regular NFL season, you're fired. So you can't really use those reps to just try and develop raw players. I think the NFL really is missing the boat on this stuff. I don't understand the lack of like a developmental league. And, I don't know that you would play your first round pick in the developmental league. Like, I don't think the Jets would put Armand Membou in the developmental league. I don't think they put Mason Taylor there, even their second round pick, because you don't want to risk injury, especially for guys who are higher level prospects who need some development, but maybe not as much as the guys drafted later on. But, Azareye'h Thomas might benefit from a developmental league. The guys the Jets drafted on day 3 could benefit from a developmental league. This would give them the reps they need in order to become better players, because guys who are drafted later on tend to be drafted later on because they're not as ready to contribute on day 1, and they need reps. And those reps, can come on the practice field, but they're more valuable when they're at actual game speed going against game competition. So, look, I think that we're at a point in the NFL calendar where we had a couple of weeks where there was really no news. So you get like anything. You get like this rookie mini camp, and it becomes like a big deal because it's the first time you see your prospects on the field. But more than anything, it's actually a chance to talk about something that's happening in the league, which we haven't had for a couple of weeks. So I think the results kind of get overanalyzed. And they're not really that valuable. The most valuable aspect of it is to see like whether anybody stood out enough to earn any of the tryout players stood out enough to earn a contract. But that's really tough on them because it's not easy to make that much of a mark in just a couple of days of practice. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that, and hope nobody's too upset about it because I do like Armand Membou. I do think Armand Membou is going to be good. I just don't think the results of this past weekend really mean all that much. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.